Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Gurudeva 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 Jaya Gurudeva Shri Guru Gauranga ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. I feel very honored and humbled to be giving the class on Srimad Bhagavatam today. We'll be speaking from Canto 3, Chapter 24, text number 37. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading from Canto 3, Chapter 24, text 37. Eṣaḥ ātma-patho vyakto naṣṭaḥ kālena bhūyasā tam pravartayituṁ deham imam viddhi mayā bhṛtam eṣaḥ ātma-patho vyakto naṣṭaḥ kālena bhūyasā pravartayituṁ deham imam viddhi mayā bhṛtam eṣaḥ ātma-patho vyakto naṣṭaḥ kālena bhūyasā tam pravartayitum deham imam viddhi mayā bhṛtam. Vaishnavis? Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. This path of self-realization, which is difficult to understand, has now been lost in the course of time. Please know that I have assumed this body of Kapila to introduce and explain this philosophy to human society again. Please repeat. This path of self-realization, which is difficult to understand, has now been lost in the course of time. Please know that I have assumed this body of Kapila to introduce and explain this philosophy to human society again. Please forgive me, I forgot to do the synonyms. We'll continue with the purport. It is not true that Sāṅkhya philosophy is a new system of philosophy introduced by Kapila as material philosophers introduce new kinds of mental, speculative thought to supersede that of another philosopher. On the material platform, everyone, especially the mental speculator, tries to be more prominent than others. The field of activity of the speculators is the mind. There is no limit to the different ways in which one can agitate the mind. The mind can be unlimitedly agitated, and thus one can put forward an unlimited number of theories. Sāṅkhya philosophy is not like that. It is not mental speculation. It is factual, but at the time of Kapila, it was lost. In due course of time, a particular type of knowledge may be lost or may be covered for the time being. That is the nature of this material world. A similar statement was made by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, Sa kāleneha mahata yoga naṣṭaḥ. In course of time, the yoga system as stated in Bhagavad Gita was lost. It was coming in parampara, in disciplic succession, but due to the passage of time, it was lost. The time factor is so pressing that in the course of time, everything within this material world is spoiled or lost. The yoga system of Bhagavad Gita was lost before the meeting of Krishna and Arjuna. Therefore, Krishna again enunciated the same ancient yoga system to Arjuna, who could actually understand Bhagavad Gita. Similarly, Kapila also said that the system of Sāṅkhya philosophy was not exactly being introduced by him. It was already current, but in course of time, it was mysteriously lost, and therefore he appeared to reintroduce it. That is the purpose of the incarnation of Godhead. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. Dharma means the real occupation of the living entity. When there is a discrepancy in the eternal occupation of the living entity, the Lord comes and introduces the real occupation of life. Any so-called religious system that is not in the line of devotional service is called adharma sansthapanā. When people forget their eternal relationship with God and engage in something other than devotional service, the engagement is called irreligion. How one can get out of the miserable condition of material life is stated in Sāṅkhya philosophy. And the Lord himself is explaining this sublime system. Translation once again. This path of self-realization, which is difficult to understand, has now been lost in the course of time. Please know that I have assumed this body of Kapila to introduce and explain this philosophy to human society again. Om Ajnanatirmirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srila Radhanath Swaminiti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedant Swaminiti Namine Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this chapter is entitled The Renunciation of Kardama Muni, and in the previous verses there's beautiful descriptions describing who Kardama Muni is, how he got married to Mother Devahuti, and how Lord Kapila actually appeared on this in the world. And Lord Kapila is actually Krishna himself. He is an incarnation of the Lord. So in the previous verse, in fact, Lord Kapila is saying himself about his appearance. He specifically says that the purpose of his appearance is to simply explain the Sāṅkhya philosophy. And then it is also mentioned in this particular verse, particularly in the translation, there's three important points which are mentioned directly in the translation. The first is where Lord Kapila says, this Sāṅkhya philosophy is a path of self-realization. That's a very important point here. It is not something which can be synonymous with dry knowledge, which is very academic in nature and can be understood by our tiny brains, whereas Sāṅkhya, the real Sāṅkhya philosophy, is actually quite difficult to understand, and it is the path of self-realization. So the first important point for us to understand between the theistic and the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophies, which I'll talk about in just a moment, is that the real Sāṅkhya philosophy is strictly meant for self-realization. The second part, which is mentioned in the translation by Lord Kapila, is that it is difficult to understand. Oftentimes we've heard Srila Prabhupada mentioning in his classes as well as in his writings that devotional service is very easy. All that we have to do is simply chant, dance, sing, and of course serve Lord Krishna. But overall, if we are not sincere and we don't have a humble attitude, devotional service can be very, very complicated and very difficult. And in this case, Lord Kapila says this path of self-realization is very difficult to understand. And the reason why this is very difficult to understand is predominantly two. One, we are all materially conditioned souls. And two, as materially conditioned souls, we have four major defects. And we'll talk about those defects. As a result of these shortcomings within us, it is very difficult to understand the path of self-realization. The path of self-realization cannot be understood by our own endeavors. In fact, our own effort is not enough. It is mentioned when we discuss the Damodar Leela, the significance of the two fingers too short. And those two fingers reflect our own endeavor as well as Krishna's mercy. So we cannot gain anything with our own endeavor. Krishna's mercy has to be behind. So likewise, when we are on the path of self-realization, if we try to understand the Vedas and the scriptures simply by reading them academically and saying that within the next 5 years I'll complete the Bhagavatam and the Vedas, we will actually not make much progress. It is mentioned in our Shastras that 3 elements are absolutely critical in the path of self-realization. And those three elements are the knowledge-giving elements coming from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. If we fail to take shelter of these three elements and simply rely on our own erudition, our own scholarship, our own knowledge, we will not be successful. So this is the second point that Lord Kapila has said, that this path of self-realization is very difficult to understand. And the third thing is mentioned is, it has now been lost in the course of time. So time factor is something that nobody can escape, no matter what. Whether we are Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, we cannot escape the factor of time. In fact, time is actually churning the pradhan, the material energy, and it's making the things more and more temporary, because as they are growing older, they are reaching towards their final annihilation stage. So time actually erodes everything. It is mentioned that when we get hurt and we get an injury and we have a scar on our skin, in the first 2 or 3 days, the pain will be quite intense. And then over a period of time, the pain actually recedes. And that is the influence of time. And the influence of time can be both good and bad. In terms of goodness, it can make us feel better when we are diseased. But in terms of actually living the life, the time element can eventually destroy us. So 3 important principles in the translation. Sāṅkhya is the path of the real self-realization. Sāṅkhya is difficult to understand. And third, it was lost in the due course of time. And Srila Prabhupada mentions here that there are 2 kinds of Sāṅkhya. I'm going to actually split my talk into paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, and from the purport. In paragraph 1, Srila Prabhupada specifically mentions that Sāṅkhya is actually nothing new. So it's not a newly indoctrinated philosophy, as there are so many philosophies coming in the world today. So many artificial religions, so many synthetic spiritual organizations are coming. So Sāṅkhya is not like that. Sāṅkhya is the oldest, in fact. It is pure, it's the oldest. It is being reintroduced by Lord Kapila because it was lost over a period of time. And there is no speculation involved here. Speculators who are making different kinds of new philosophies and doctrines actually rely on their field of activity. And Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, quote, "The field of activity of the speculators is the mind. And the mind can be our best friend, and it can be our worst enemy." So for speculators, the field of activity is the mind. And the mind can take us far away from Krishna, or the mind can take us at the lotus feet of Krishna. And Krishna has given us the free will to make that choice, whether we want to take our mind towards Krishna or take the mind away from Krishna. So for speculators, the field of activity is the mind. But for devotee, the field of activities is our own devotional service, where a large number of rituals and activities can be conducted, where the mind is actually controlled. And those are various methods and methodologies that we use. And then in the second paragraph, Srila Prabhupada really stresses more on the time factor. And he mentions how Krishna also had to speak the Bhagavad Gita all over again 5,000 years ago to his disciple Arjuna. And this actually indicates the influence of the time once again. So the Gita, as we all know, was spoken millions of years ago to the sun god Vivaswan, who spoke it to Manu, who gave it to Ikshvaku. But then over a course of time, even through disciplic succession, the time factor is very, very strong. The Gita was lost, and so the Lord had to come back and speak again just 5,000 years ago. So if the Gita could be lost, one can imagine the Sāṅkhya philosophy, which is very voluminous, also got eroded over a period of time. So Srila Prabhupada also mentioned that the Lord actually descends to speak the Gita to save his devotees and annihilate the demons here. So now I'll talk a little bit about Sāṅkhya. I'm just going to divide my talk into what exactly is Sāṅkhya, the differences between the theistic Sāṅkhya and the atheistic Sāṅkhya, and finally touch a little bit on pradhan, and we'll talk a little bit about Srila Jiva Goswami's interpretation of pradhan here. So Sāṅkhya word is very commonly used in the Sanskrit word, and if you go to India, the common the definition of Sāṅkhya is number or enumeration. When we say, what is the Sāṅkhya of this? It means what is the number of one particular item. So here, Sāṅkhya is basically a philosophical system which defines the relationship between the self, the material nature, which is Prakriti, and the Supreme Purush. That means there is Krishna in the Sāṅkhya philosophy. So in the two Sāṅkhya philosophies, the theistic and atheistic versions, there is one major difference which makes us reject the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophy. And the predominant difference is the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophy does not recognize that there is a supreme personality of Godhead. According to the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophy, everything arises as a result of the combination and permutation of different material elements. And according to those atheistic Sāṅkhyites, since the manifestations of the material energy are themselves temporary and illusory, their philosophy is that the cause of these manifestations is also temporary and illusory. So that is the biggest flaw and the biggest drawback in the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophy. But we know that Sāṅkhya philosophy is just not Purush and Prakriti, that means not just the self and the material energy, but rather the supreme self behind both the energies here. And that is the biggest distinction here. So even when we compare the speculative philosophers and the material scientists, their whole notion is based on the foundation that everything is coming as a result of combination of material elements. And eventually the soul, if they believe in a soul, is also a byproduct of matter. And essentially, as they say, that life can be created by a combination of chemicals, and which is absolutely incorrect, that there is no way possible, no matter how hard we try, even with artificial intelligence, there's no way life can be created without the presence of a soul, which is given through the mercy of Lord Krishna. So Krishna has three energies: the Bahiranga Shakti, which is external energy, the Antaranga Shakti, which is internal, and the Tathastha, which is marginal, and the Jivas are in the marginal. And so if we look at the relationship between material energy and material manifestations, the material energy of Krishna is eternal. It is not temporary, it's not illusory. Material energy itself is eternal, but the manifestations of the material energy are temporary. So as we know, as the yugas move from one cycle to another, the material manifestations are manifest and then they disappear. So these manifestations are temporary while material energy is eternal. So there's no way we can say Krishna's energy is temporary. Krishna's energy can never be temporary because Krishna himself is eternal. So how can his energies be temporary? So it's a very rational way of explaining this. And Sāṅkhya philosophy is the foundational principle of Sāṅkhya philosophy is actually pradhan. And pradhan is the fundamental underlying principle which explains the material energy as well as the entire Sāṅkhya philosophical debate here. And it is mentioned here by Srila Prabhupada that pradhan actually exists in two states. In the unmanifest stage, which is a combination of the three modes of material nature, it is known as pradhan, but when it becomes manifested, it is known as prakriti. That's the very subtle difference between them here. Now I really want to read a very brief dialogue between Dr. Singh, His Holiness Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami Maharaj, and Srila Prabhupada. This is in Los Angeles on April 29th, 1973. Dr. Singh says, Srila Prabhupada, may we hear a little bit about Sāṅkhya philosophy? And Srila Prabhupada responds, quote, there are actually two kinds of Sāṅkhya philosophy. The ancient Sāṅkhya philosophy, originally taught by Lord Kapila Dev, and the modern Sāṅkhya philosophy, taught more recently by the atheist Kapila. Lord Kapila's Sāṅkhya explains how to become detached from matter and search out Lord Vishnu within the heart. This Sāṅkhya is actually a process of devotional service. But the modern Sāṅkhya philosophy simply analyzes the material world into its various elements. In that respect, it is just like modern scientific research. Sāṅkhya means to count. We are also Sāṅkhya philosophers to some extent because we count the material elements. This is land, this is water, this is fire, this is air, this is ether. Furthermore, I can count my mind, my intelligence, and my ego. Beyond my ego, however, I cannot count. But Krishna says that there is something beyond the ego, and that is the living force. This is what scientists do not know. They think that life is merely a combination of material elements, but Krishna denies this in the Bhagavad Gita. So, as I mentioned earlier, the distinction between the atheistic philosophy and the real Sāṅkhya philosophy is very clear here. One accepts the authority of the Vedas and believes that there is a superpower, supreme personality of Godhead behind the Prakriti and the Purush, and the other one does not. So coming back to the material scientists, which I can identify with myself personally, the biggest flaw in material scientists and mental speculators is the complete reliance on the gross senses, the sense of eye, ears, nose, touch, and taste. They're not able to see beyond these 5 material senses. Although there is a little bit of focus on the 3 subtle senses, mind, intelligence, and false ego, but they cannot be quantified. We cannot quantify mind. I cannot say my mind is 73% while your mind is 85%. There is no quantification. Although we can quantify the neurons in the brains, there is about 10 billion neurons, but we cannot quantify the mind. Likewise, ego cannot be quantified, and likewise, mind intelligence cannot be quantified. And the biggest problem why they are simply relying on the material gross senses is because they have the 4 defects. We all have the 4 defects actually, not just them, because we are also conditioned souls. We are in the material world, but we understand that we have these defects. And in a mood of humility, understanding our shortcomings and our weaknesses, we rely on Krishna to erode these defects so we can take shelter at his lotus feet. And we all know what these defects are. Our imperfect senses, tendency to cheat, to be always an illusion, and also always be in tendency to cheat, make mistakes. The 4th defect is always making mistakes. So when we look at these speculators and material scientists, all these 4 defects are very prominent. But for us as aspiring devotees, we cannot escape these defects, but we are aware of these defects. So when you are aware of something which is a weakness within us, we make all efforts to erode that weakness. We make all efforts to rectify that mistake. But the philosophers are not even able to understand these 4 defects, as a result of which they completely rely on the atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophy, because that is exclusively saying that everything depends on the material energy. There is nothing beyond this. And material energy is responsible for all creation. In fact, they are actually touch upon voidism, that material energy is leading to the manifestation of spirit, if they believe in the spirit here. I'm just going to read a few more quotes from Srila Prabhupada, which I think are very brilliant and talk about Sāṅkhya actually in a very, very clear and lucid manner. This is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 4, purport. The aim of the analytical study of the material world is to find the soul of existence. That is the goal of actually the material world when we study it. The soul of the material world is Vishnu, or the supersoul. Devotional service to the Lord entails service to the supersoul. One process is to find the root of the tree, and the other is to water that root. The real student of Sāṅkhya philosophy finds the root of the material world, Vishnu, and then, in perfect knowledge, engages himself in the service of the Lord. This is an extremely important point. This is why I actually brought this purport. So as aspiring devotees, we have 2 prominent duties. One, to find the root of the tree, and the root is Krishna. So simply knowing that Krishna is behind everything is just part of our knowledge. The second part is even more beautiful. Once we realize Krishna is behind everything, we have to worship Krishna and render devotional service to him. So there's a lot of philosophers, a lot of religionists who understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they do not engage in bhakti. So their life is incomplete. Simply realizing Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not rendering service to him is just half of the story. In fact, the path of bhakti is the most important for us. And any incarnation, whichever is there, in fact, I just heard a talk very recently where any incarnation where we have a specific attachment to Lord Ram, Lord Narasimhadev, Lord Krishna, all of them are coming from Krishna. So that is actually known as bhakti. Continuing here, Prabhupada writes, therefore, in essence, there is no difference between the two because the aim of both is Vishnu. Those who do not know the ultimate end say that the purposes of Sāṅkhya and Karma Yoga are not the same. But one who is learned knows the unifying aim in these different processes. This is from Bhagavad Gita. I'm going to read a couple more here. This is coming from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 25.56. Atheistic Sāṅkhya philosophers like Kapila, the atheistic, analyze the material elements very scrutinizingly and thereby come to the conclusion that material nature is the cause of everything. They do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a cause of all causes. And then Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 39. This Sāṅkhya has nothing to do with the Sāṅkhya philosophy of the atheist Kapila. Long before the impostor Kapila's Sāṅkhya, the Sāṅkhya philosophy was expounded in the Srimad Bhagavatam by the true Lord Kapila, the incarnation of Lord Krishna, who explained it to his mother, Devahuti. It is clearly explained by him that the Purush, or the Supreme Lord, is active and that he creates by looking over the Prakriti. This is accepted in the Vedas and in the Gita. The description in the Vedas indicates that the Lord glanced over the Prakriti or nature and impregnated it with atomic individual souls. So it's very, very clear from all our Shastras, whether it's Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or any other Shastras, that Krishna is the primary cause of all material manifestations, all spiritual manifestations, everything is actually created by Krishna here. So this dialogue, I did a little research yesterday just to see what kind of dialogues people are having on the internet. Answering this question, is matter a product of spirit or is spirit a product of matter? And majority of them, particularly on Google, is that spirit is the product of matter. So there's a lot of disservice being done in the society today because incorrect knowledge is being propounded everywhere. And people are simply believing that material energy is leading to the formation of a spirit. And since material energy is temporary, the spirit is also temporary. And so this disservice actually has to be rectified. And that's what Srila Prabhupada wants us all to do through book distribution. So one of the most brilliant purport, which I actually read yesterday, I did a little search on the mention of Sāṅkhya in Veda base, and there's thousands of mention of the word Sāṅkhya. But one particular purport which really struck me, which is actually a very detailed purport, is coming from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, 6.14-15. I'm just going to summarize it here because it's really, really beautiful here. Srila Prabhupada writes, just as the external energy consists of two parts, the efficient cause known as nimitta and the material cause, upadan, maya being the efficient cause and pradhan, the material cause, so Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, assumes two forms to create the material world with the efficient and material causes. Lord Vishnu is the efficient cause of the material world, and Narayan, in the form of Sri Advaita Acharya, is the material cause. It's absolutely fascinating just to see the systematic breakdown of the two parts of the external energy and also the two parts of the material world, how the efficient cause and the material cause are so nicely explained here. And of course, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, he mentions in one of his Sandarbhas, Pradhan is the unmanifest stage of the three gunas in a neutralized stage. And once this becomes manifested, it comes to be known as Prakriti. So Lord Kapila is saying here that this is very difficult to understand. As I mentioned here earlier, the reasons, there are various reasons why the path of self-realization can be very difficult to understand. So what is the problem? Why do the atheistic Sāṅkhyites believe that material energy is the source of everything? So some examples which they give, which I actually discovered from Srila Prabhupada's purports in Veda base, is when we see something, we believe in it. And some of the examples that I'm going to quote are where a scorpion lays eggs in a heap of rice and the little baby scorpions come out of it. So for someone who does not have accurate knowledge, they will say or they will think that the baby scorpions are coming out of the rice. But that's not true. The scorpions are not coming out of the rice. They are actually being given birth by the mother Scorpio. So this is one of the drawbacks of the Sāṅkhyites. Second one is very interesting, that the cow eats straw and then gives milk. So what is the reason for the production of the milk? The atheistic philosophers say it is the material part, the straw, which is generating the milk. But it's not the straw. It is the cow which is generating the milk. So our counter argument would be the bull is also eating straw, but the bull does not give milk. So from that point of view, when you look at these very fine line of distinctions, one can see the flaws in the atheistic philosophy, which is very clear, it's very rational, and this is all coming from examples that Srila Prabhupada has given. Same thing, the water pot and clay example. The clay is a material element, and it gives rise to the form of the water pot. But behind the clay, there is somebody who has made that clay. Clay is not directly giving rise to the water pot. So the numerous example, a tree is matter, and the tree is producing fruit, but fruit is not being produced by matter. Tree is actually life. So one can see the problem with the Sāṅkhyites is the intense focus on the material energy and negating the contribution of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's very important to understand. I was trying to find, and maybe Archita Prabhu, you can correct me, trying to find out the advent of this atheistic Kapila. Where, when, how, but majority of the Sāṅkhya, I did a Sāṅkhya philosophy search on the web, and they predominantly mention Purush and Prakriti. Nobody mentions Krishna in the background here, which is actually pretty sad here. The only thing that I found was that this Kapila, the atheistic Kapila, is a descendant of the dynasty of Agni. That's the only part I was able to search here. But it really doesn't matter to us. In fact, we should not make any effort to look at the biographical information of atheistic philosophers, because that's not our goal in life here. So I just want to end here. Since I'm in the scientific fields, I just wanted to end here by giving you a very overwhelming material calculation, which shows us that material energy combination is absolutely not possible for the design that we are seeing in the material world. It is intelligent design. The modern scientists do not use the word God. In fact, we are prohibited from using the word God in our classrooms. Otherwise, we lose our job, unfortunately. So we use the word intelligent design, which means there is a supreme designer. Nobody knows who that designer is. They think it's a material energy. So there is a designer, and the example I want to give you is the human body is the most fascinating design of Krishna. And we all know we have cells in the body, and when we get hurt, these cells die off. But I just want to give you some numbers here, so please kindly bear with me, because it's such an amazing fascination. The entire human body is made up of 10 trillion cells. And 10 trillion is actually a very large number. And the whole blueprint of a life, which dictates what the color of our eyes is, what the color of our hair is, skin color, some behavior, some genetics, is determined by the DNA. And the DNA actually lies in the nucleus. And it is mentioned that if we remove the DNA. The DNA is basically like a wire, like a rope, and it's just going in little loops, and it's extremely condensed. But it is mentioned that if we remove the DNA from a single cell of the human body, it is about 6 feet from a single cell. So if you consider the entire DNA from all the 10 trillion cells of the body, how long that would be? That would be about roughly 60 trillion feet or 10 billion miles of DNA. That's from one human body. And the human population is roughly about 7 billion people. So if you multiply the entire DNA, it's an astronomical number. So if I was to open each one of my 10 trillion cells and remove the DNA and extend it like a rope, and that is 10 billion miles. The Earth is about 93 billion miles away from the sun. And if I stretch my DNA, that would go to the sun and back 61 times. So you can imagine, how can something so intricate happen by random chance? I think it's befuddling that people believe that this is all happening by random chance. And in this 60 trillion feet of DNA, it is mentioned that if one letter goes bad, it can result in cancer. It can result in Alzheimer's. It can result in different kinds of diseases. So this is clear indication that there is an intelligent designer behind our human body, behind all the living entities in the world, behind even the stones and the rocks and the water, what to speak of the 1/4 energy of Krishna, which is the material energy. We have not even touched upon the 3/4, the spiritual energy or the spiritual manifestations of the Lord. So I just wanted to share this example with you about how material energy is fascinating. We cannot deride the material energy. We cannot say material energy is inferior, because it is the energy of Krishna. So how can we say material energy is inferior? Of course, compared to the superior energy, spiritual energy, it is at a lower platform, but material energy is also Krishna's own energy, so we should actually respect it. So just to sum up this particular translation here, the 3 points that Lord Kapila mentioned, that he came specifically to reignite the Sāṅkhya philosophy, the theistic Sāṅkhya philosophy, because it was lost as a result of the impact of time, and it is difficult to understand, and this is the true philosophy we've talked about earlier. If we want to go deep into it, it is made up of those 24 elements, but we won't have time to go over it here. But for us, it's more important to go beyond these 24 elements and understand that one element which is giving rise to all these 24 elements is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Yes, Prabhu. So I'll repeat the question here. His Grace Bhrigupati Prabhu is asking, why was the message of Bhagavad Gita lost even when Srila Vyasadeva was present? And based on my understanding, 2 factors is, one, the influence of time. There's a very long period of time. We're talking about millions of years. And the preservation at that point was not done in writing. It was basically done through oration and shabda. So over a period of time, it is likely that since we're talking about millions of years, it's logical that it could be lost. And secondly, please do correct me, secondly, the way I understood is the disciplic succession, when the knowledge was passed, it could be misinterpreted and it would be lost, or it could be reinterpreted to suit individuals based on one particular yuga. But for me, the most important point is the influence of time is just too long for it to be preserved, particularly when we don't have any written records also. Archita Prabhu, would you like to correct me? Thank you. Bhrigupati Prabhu, does that answer? Please. Swaz Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you for a nice class. Where does the principle of infinite play in the part of this, whole scheme of the, Kapila, theory of existence, the Maya one? So how do they explain this principle of infinite?
Very, very interesting question. So you're talking about the atheistic philosophy here.
Yes, atheist.
So according to them, the material energy is eternal, but the manifestations are temporary. From that point of view, we are sort of synonymous. But since they are relying on the excessive focus is only on material energy, and since material energy is following the law of conservation of energy, it's created, it's destroyed, it's created, it's destroyed.
Yeah.
From that point of view, they are saying that this is infinite. But they also fall on the philosophical perspective of voidism. Now it's very difficult for us, at least for me, to define voidism. What exactly is void?
Yeah.
So one can say void is just a space, it's either. So when we don't see a starting boundary or an ending boundary, it's like a black mass. That's infinite. So from that point of view, they believe that material energy is constantly the cause as well as the effect of all manifestations. And since they rely on creation coming from voidism and even destruction going back to voidism, and since the void, it's very hard for me to define a void. From that point of view, they are actually saying that this is following an infinite, for lack of a better word, infinite foundation for the material energy, at least from my limited understanding, which is absolutely incorrect, actually.
Yeah, it almost, they don't really have an answer for the replenishing them. They don't really know how that actually exists.
Because they don't believe in the Supreme Purush.
Yeah.
That's the biggest fallback. And I fail to understand how can they not believe in the Supreme Purush, because it's very clear that there has to be a designer behind something. Yes, Archita Prabhu.
Krishna himself deals with that in the Bhagavad Gita. Itcha dvesha samutena. Due to desire and hatred, they don't want him to exist. And therefore, first of all, they philosophize, they theorize, and then they fail to support their own theories. Just like that one statement you made about matter. And when I was a child learning physics, they taught you matter cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes phases. So if you burn a piece of paper, that paper now turns into smoke and some other energy, but the energy itself continues to exist. At the same time, they're promoting this business of a singularity exploding. So where did the singularity come from? If everything that we see in this universe came out of a singularity, a small point that exploded, where did that singularity come from? So their presentation is completely inconsistent. And that we can see that because we accept the Vedic viewpoint, but those who don't accept the Vedas, don't accept the existence of a supreme being, it just seems, they just accept it because it seems there is no other explanation. So the point is, the Sāṅkhyites, at least coming from India, the 24 elements that they present, they exist, and we can agree with them. The working senses, the knowledge-acquiring senses, the sense objects, those things exist. We don't debate that. But the modern scientists who are presenting this business of Big Bang and all that, they can't prove it. They can't prove it. Once I was in USC presenting philosophy on a board, and there was an atheist who said that, you're religious, you're all very nice, but you just believe in things. So I proved to him in front of everybody, to his embarrassment, that he believes in the Big Bang, because they can't prove it. It's a belief system. So they believe that matter is the source of everything. They believe that matter can't be created or destroyed, but they can't prove any of it.
Thank you, Prabhu.
In the purport, it is mentioned that this philosophy is difficult to understand, right? But if you see, Kapila is explaining this to Devahuti, and she's a woman. And in the Bhagavatam, somewhere it says that women are less intelligent, right? So how is it that this difficult philosophy is being presented to Devahuti, who is a woman?
Simple answer, through the mercy of Lord Kapila himself. Just through the mercy of Lord Kapila. And we have to remember, Devahuti, Mother Devahuti is not an ordinary woman like us. She is the wife of Kardama Muni, who is a supremely exalted personality. But my short answer is, through the mercy, Lord Kapila is her guru, because he gave the philosophy to her. So through the mercy of guru, the disciple learns.
So if that's the case, then why is it that Devahuti, till this point of this 24th chapter, has not achieved the perfection, and then she has to wait to hear the Sāṅkhya to get perfection, whereas Kardama Muni has already got the perfection and he's leaving the house, he's done, and she has to stay back. So it's kind of like simultaneously contradicting, right? Like if she says she's intelligent, then why she's not liberated? If she's not intelligent, then how can she understand the most difficult philosophy?
Because Devahuti, like we all have desires and we all have aspirations, and in the Grihastha ashram, she was following her complete duty. And a natural inclination of a woman is to become a mother. So she was actually acting completely in her normal domain. She had desires, and remember, she served Kardama Muni for years and years and years. It is mentioned that she became emaciated with matted hair. She never paid attention to her appearance. She served him completely life and soul. She never mentioned right on the first 1 month of marriage that build me a palace, we should have a union. She never did that. She completely dedicated her life, and it was Kardama Muni who actually saw that my wife is serving me so nicely. Let me fulfill her desires. So she is an extremely exalted soul. From that point of view, she's completely within her right to accept what a husband is supposed to give to her wife. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you.
All conditioned souls are less intelligent. It's not just about man or woman. And everybody has to follow a process for perfection, beginning with the first living being, Lord Brahma. He had to follow a process to come to the point of perfection. So Kardama Muni followed the Ashtanga Yoga process, mixed with Bhakti, obviously, to come to the perfect stage. And so Devahuti now is following the recommended path for every age, Shravanam Kirtanam. She's listening to her son, who is the Lord himself, and that will bring her to the perfectional stage, which will bring anybody to the perfectional stage. That's what Brahma heard from the Lord within his heart. Everybody in the material world is less intelligent. It's not a question of male or female. And if you don't follow the right process, you won't come to perfection, whether you're male or female. So Kardama Muni was not perfect in the beginning. He followed the Ashtanga Yoga process, mixed with Bhakti, came to the perfectional point. Devahuti now is following pure Bhakti by simply hearing from the supreme source of all knowledge.
Thank you. I just want to counteract that a little bit. Although the Lord says, women of less intelligence, but Lord says in the Gita also that in women, I am memory, intelligence, fine speech, steadfastness, and patience. He also says that. So that's Krishna saying. So I'm not trying to be feministic here, but that's straight coming from the Lord himself. I think we'll end now because the time is, maybe I can take the questions later. Yeah. Yes, the tendency to cheat, imperfect senses, always remain in illusion, and always make mistakes. These 4 defects every conditioned soul has, human beings and animals, all of us. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.